Hello, this is a presentation about the music of Bolivia. This is a quote from Inca Huayno Kappa legend. Supposedly said, this comes from a legend and supposedly said about the beautiful wilderness and hills around Bolivia, which includes the Andes Mountains, the longest mountain range in South America. A little bit about the society behind Bolivian music. The modernization and allocation of oil and water rights and resources has triggered wars throughout Bolivia's history. There has been the Chaco War in the 1930s when Paraguay won land from Bolivia, and 100,000 around 100,000 people in Bolivia lost their lives. The Water War in 1997, where Bolivians had chased out American-based Argonaut that had raised rates on water. Bolivia had called out that water was a human right. The gas war in 2003, this was a war over the fact that the Bolivian government would only keep 18% of profits made from Bolivian natural gas. The president was made to resign and contracts were demolished. There's also been war in Bolivia about taxes and also coca leaves. There was a story that I had read through the research about the coca leaves being exported from Bolivia into Chile. The cocaine that was made more money than Bolivia was worth at that point in time, the entire country. A little bit about the society behind Bolivian music. We have the Aymaria, a language spoken by 2 million Bolivians, about 1 in 4 Bolivians. The Calchaquecha, the speaking people. Spanish is also a language that's spoken in Bolivia. The national anthem is written in Spanish. The Tuanaca, the capital of Mero World. Indigenous rights were instated about 1973. Indigenous versus elite is a common vie that has been in history and now is happening in the culture in Bolivia in common era. Some cities that are in Bolivia, we have Santa Cruz del Sierra, Cochabamba, La Paz, El Hato, Sucre, Oruro, Potosi, Montero, Trinidad, Camiri, Warnes, Banato, Santiago del Torno. A little bit about the structure of Bolivian music. We know from the study that folk structures resembling global scale structure, we have that Bolivian music is structured commonly or similarly to other folk music that we know throughout the world, and even though so in America. Accelerations are common in Bolivian music. We also know that strophic form, common form of communal composition of song, is common in Bolivian music, in traditional Bolivian music. The cadence is more melodic and structured. There are a lot of scales, as there are in mariachi music and some Mexican music. We hear a lot of upbeat and traditional storytelling tempos. We also know that there's an elaborate composition to some of the Bolivian music that we hear, even so the orchestras or the classical music that is represented or that comes from Bolivia. Basic measures using melodies and essential verse like storylines. The music is very energized. The introductions embolden mood instantly. One can instantly recognize Bolivian music, and especially so if it's traditional Bolivian music. There are faster paced traditional songs, slower paced. There are a lot of bellows and lasting notes, quick finger picking and really quick flute fingering. These make up the headlining sounds, and these there are a lot of sounds that last throughout, or there are a lot of notes that run for many measures because there are a lot of flutes and brass instruments and aerophones played in Bolivian music. Rote-like strategies in some of the music, sequences, structure, repeating. We know that there are a lot of verses that repeat and repeat and repeat, while not only that happens, but then there are overtones or other instruments headlining that sound over those long-lasting rote-like measures. A little bit of the politics behind Bolivian music. We know that the market is very harsh and very competitive, and there is a prominent political line in the market, and this is obvious where any expenditure in the country means, as I had read in the research that I had conducted, that the most likely that every dollar that is spent is either going to the indigenous people or to the non-indigenous people, and this is a very big matter in Bolivia. There is a big rural versus urban vie and emulation female vendors called colas. The population in Bolivia is about 11.4 million, and that's of 2019 today. Independence Day was in August 2000. The national anthem was written and instated in 1851. There are more than 20 active political parties in Bolivia, and there are two major ones, the conservative and the liberals, but those do not mean what us in America believe that conservatives are or what liberals would be. A little bit the economics behind Bolivian music. We know that 67% of the economy is informal. That means that it's a market-based economy. That means that it changes every day. That means that the market base changes every single day depending on what happens in the market and what kind of money is spent on what. Fines are not a part of the judicial punishments. The local military bosses ran the country due to the fall of silver mines in the late 1830s. One major record label in the country still, and this is Disco Landia, more than 50 years old. That is still standing and competent or solidified in Bolivia at this point. 60% of the input of the market is indigenous. We know that in 1800, Bolivia was the second richest country in South America next to Brazil. That changed, in fact, that now Bolivia is a low middle income country, said to be one of the poorest in the country, one of the poorest countries in South America. Bolivia says to be a very densely populated compared to other areas in South America, and most records of the country that I found through archives and archival research and flipping through the research that's available most likely and mostly focus on research that's been done and papers that have been written, either journals or otherwise, about the economics and war that are going on and have gone on in Bolivia. A little bit of the social aspects of Bolivian music. There are traces of Spanish influence in Bolivian music. We see that there are Hispanic dances integrated into the culture. We know that the styles of tradition of the chiquera, the ticaria, there are also prominent carnival rhythms that happen in Bolivian music. We know that the Indians that we say that would be Indians in Bolivia are the Yarabi, the Arabiscus, and the Maracu. There is a fusion between Spain and indigenous people that goes into the kind of music that's made in Bolivia. In the tribes we know of that are in the Turia region, or the Guarini and Areos. The ideals and concepts behind the music we know in Bolivia, we know that the traditional folk music is very common and still is common. In the 1990s up into the 2000s, there are still traditional albums being released about traditional Bolivian music and folk Bolivian music. There are also modernizations and globalization movements within the music scene in Bolivia, and we also know that the indigenous and the elite are separated by music also. That we will see later that there are classical elite artists and there are then two folk artists. We know that native aspects go into the construction of songs. We know that Spain has a prominent influence. We know that there are global initiatives in the music scene, and then also we know that Bolivia is very festive and that warrior dances and the culture of warriors is very much still prevailing and is still a celebratory matter in Bolivia. Continuing on ideals and melodies, we know that a lot of Bolivian have cyclical measures, and there are ritualistic aspects as well as their representations, as we had read in the book about planting and harvesting and how seasons, wet and dry seasons had an impact on the music that was made, as well as there is a birth and rebirth signification in the music. And this is all because of the sonic expressions of Bolivia being a sacred place and being covertly or overtly celebrated, naming so that Bolivia is sacred. A little bit of the art behind Bolivian music, we know that a lot of the songs are monodic, they're poetical, there are political aspects, modernization, globalization aspects of the elite side of music. We know that the tourist traditional, as are mariachi music in Mexico, we know that there is a prevailing distinction between Bolivian music and other music, and we recognize that when we hear Bolivian music, and it's very special, and that's celebrated in Bolivia, and we appreciate that. And then there are traditional folk music, and love is a basic or a commonality base reason of the lyrics of songs, and we also see that the songs are lyrical. The Bolivian music is very geomusical according to the proximity of the land and what the sounds are on those lands. And then there are syncopations, meaning that the sounds accelerate and de-accelerate numerous times, or that there's a common attribute. The national anthem, as mentioned, was written and stated in about 1851. These are some of the lyrics that I had derived. One my was the second half of the chorus is, although this is written in Spanish in actuality, this was converted into English. What we see, excuse me, is that the second part of the chorus is to die before we would live as slaves, and that repeats on. And then one of my favorite lines from the national anthem was, "If a foreigner may, any given day, even attempt to subjugate Bolivia, let him prepare for a fatal destiny." For a fatal destiny, and I think that's very significant because as you'll see in the next slide, how festive and colorful the national anthem truly is. This is the actual sound of the national anthem, and just notice how festive it is compared to what the lyrics are actually saying in Spanish. The people in Bolivian music, we know that there are about 30 different ethnic groups make up the country. Bolivia is a Maori indigenous group in Bolivia, and the Quechua people make up the Bolivia. And then famous people in the music scene and classical music are Carlos Gutierrez Garrigo and Carlos Garriga's teachers, Sergio Perduncio, and Carlos Rosso. And a geographical proximity and history of the ethnic identities and politics and changing relationships between the Amera and Bolivian nation-state is named Tia Juana Huchu. The transmission of music, how we learn about this and how Bolivians learn about Bolivian music is, through both oral methods. We have this is taught in school, music is taught in school. There is a national music, there is also a national conservatory in La Paz, and we also know that the way people grow up, the regions that they grow up have a very big influence, and this is the location where people are, and the people that they associate with are very big indicators of what kind of music they will know about. We also know other famous people about Antonio Gonzalez Bravo, Humberto Vizquero Manjo, Maria Velasco Mandeno, and we also know that the president of Bolivia is very supportive of the Amerindian movements, which are American Indian people and traditions, and that thus goes far to music. The music caporal, these are types of dances, caporal, tango, diablado, folk, and then we have folklorico is a common type of music in Bolivia, and the opera is even known down in Bolivia. We then can also, I wanted to say something about what I had read about the research that goes down, and it explains that even though there are a lot of colorful costumes and the festivals and parades that go on about traditional Bolivian music are very important to Bolivia, and the festivities that go on are a very big part of the culture, but we also know that these masks and these things and these props that go along with those costumes are symbols, of oppression and overcoming oppression in Bolivia. We also know that Simon Garfunkel's famous song El Condor Pasa was a native Bolivian song and was translated. And then we also should be aware that a lot of Bolivian music is very upbeat and positive. Here are some of the instruments that are common in Bolivia: the pan flute, the empano, quena, the flute, the urk, the horn, the punguelo, the flute, the bandolin, which sounds much like a mandolin, the trompeta, a trumpet, the retuento, a tiny guitar, ticas, which I believe are much like rattles or tambourines, the dolzena, which are much like clarinets, seem like clarinets, the caja, the tambor drums, samponia, a different type of drum, the rolando banoles, which is much like a banjo, the caja, which is a drum, and the charango, which is I really wanted to show you this sound too because this is an elite aspect of the charango, which is a native instrument I believe that is native to Bolivia or very well common in traditional Bolivian music. This is, I believe, an elitist take on the charango, which is very significant. It's a very classic. It's a very valuable piece. Thinking critical about issues. We know a lot of the issues that go into the music are war, oppression, indigenous versus elite people, economics, location, spirituality, party and festival, dancing, tradition, the modernization, country, the politics, and nature are all elements within Bolivian music. We see a need for a lot of research to be done on Bolivian music, photos, writing, history, the scene, respects to the music. We need more materials about Bolivian art. Folk music is a sense has a sense of sacrality to it, and the sounds that we go through are very very valuable that we hear.